Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Myra Lara and I have my colleague with me as well. Her name is Fatima Castañeda, and we are both family support providers for Family Focus Resource Center, which is a sponsored program from Cal State University Northridge, which is CSUN. Our center offers free assistance to families of children and adults with all abilities. We provide resources and referrals, parent-to-parent mentoring, educational workshops like we're having today, support groups in English and in Spanish, and IEP trainings. And today we are collaborating with Mari Rios, Senior Advocate, Senior Attorney Maria Iriarte, and Lori Pfeiffer from Disability Rights California, which will be presenting on IHSS Part 2. Like I mentioned, this presentation will be recorded, so we ask that you stay on mute. If you have questions, you can go ahead and enter them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. And throughout the presentations, the attorney will pause to answer your questions. So thank you very much for being here. Lonnie?
Thank you so much, Myra. And thank you, Fatima, for having us today. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lonnie Pfeiffer. I'm with Disability Rights California. On behalf of our team, Mary Rios and Maria Iriarte, I just wanted to share a little bit about our agency, and then I'll turn it over to our presenters, actually to Mary Rios. We'll talk about our public comment survey today. Disability Rights is formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We are a nonprofit organization that provides legal services for people with disability. We work on issues such as special education, public benefits, regional center services, employment, mental health, and so forth. We do have offices in Sacramento, Los Angeles, Bay Area, San Diego, and our smaller offices are Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. At this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mary Rios.
Thank you, Lonnie. Good morning, everyone. As Lonnie indicated, my name is Mary Rios. I'm one of the senior advocates at Disability Rights California. And before we get started with the presentation, I wanted to talk briefly about our public comment survey. Every year we send out the public comment survey to our consumers, our community leaders, collaborators, agencies, to get feedback to develop our advocacy plan. And it's really important to provide that feedback. That way we know what the community wants Disability Rights California to focus on. So I've included the link in the chat. Please take a minute. It's a short survey. If you would like to see Disability Rights California focus in a specific area, please provide feedback. That's really important. Also, I just want to say that today Maria is going to present on how to calculate IHSS hours. Everyone will receive the materials. I'm going to include my information in the chat if you would like an appointment to speak to Maria on a one-to-one basis on either this topic or any other topic, such as regional center, Medi-Cal, special education. You can reach me directly. But if you would like an appointment, please reach out to me. And also, if you have any questions, raise your hand, put your question in the chat, and we will try to get to all the questions. So with that, I would like to introduce our senior attorney, Maria Iriarte.
Thank you, Mary. And like Mary said, today we're going to talk about how to calculate hours. Now, why is it important to you? Because honestly, you need to be prepared when the social worker comes out to do the initial assessment for IHSS or reassessments, because every year the social worker is going to reassess whether you still need the in-home supported services that you're getting, whether you don't. So the best advice I can give you is be prepared. And this is part 2 of a 4-part series on IHSS. Part 3 will focus on how to do a self-assessment. And we're going to provide a template that you can use, and one that we used at a hearing this year, so that you can see exactly what it takes to prepare. Because it's easy for me to tell you, you need to prepare. You need to figure out what services you need, why you need them, what hours you need, and why you need them. Easy for me to tell you that. I've been doing this for over 20 years, but I realize that you know, it's easier said than done. How does that look like, right? What kind of information would the social worker need, and especially a judge? Because if the social worker doesn't give you what you need in services and time, your next step will be to go to a hearing, and getting ready through an assessment. A self-assessment will be, you'll be 8/10 of the way ready to go to a hearing. But part of doing an assessment is knowing the tools that the social workers use in calculating hours, understanding the services, understanding the program, right? So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to do a very brief overview of the IHSS services. Then we're going to talk about how hours are calculated. In other words, there are people who only will be able to get 195 hours maximum of IHSS a month, while others will get 283 maximum, or can have the ability to get 283. And why is that, right? And we're going to talk about proration, and we're going to talk about alternative resources. We're going to go through a sample notice of action so you have a better understanding of how to read them. Then we're going to go into the tools that are used, the functional index ranking, the functional index ranking for minor kids. When we talk about minor kids, it's anyone under the age of 18. Then this other tool that is used, the assessment criteria, annotated assessment criteria. This is a tool that helps the social worker come up with the functional index ranking. We're going to talk about the hourly task guidelines, and another tool that helps the social worker when using the hourly task guidelines. Here is a resource. There's an all-county information notice issued by the California Department of Social Services. This is the state agency that administers the IHSS program in California. What I say here and the tools that we're going to review are all in this all-county information notice. So this is really important. It's a really important resource. We're also giving you, the resource for all of other all-county information notices, or all-county letters that relate to IHSS, and the IHSS regulations. The regulations are called the Manual of Policy and Procedures. Sometimes you'll see it as MPP. Well, what is the program all about? Well, it's here in the regulations, the nuts and bolts of the program, how it's supposed to work, who it's supposed to cover, what are the services, when can someone get a service. It's all in the regulations.
Maria, I'm sorry that I am interrupting you, but I don't see this. I don't see the PowerPoint on the screen.
Are you the only one? Does everyone else see it?
I see it.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can see
I
it.
see it. Mhm.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't know I can
No,
stop.
that's okay. No.
Let me
Mhm.
stop and then try to share again. Maybe that'll do the trick. Let me know, Fatima, if you can see it.
You're on mute, Fatima.
Yes, I can see it. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no, don't worry about it. It's fine. Lots of mysterious things happen with these training materials. So let's talk about IHSS. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but you need to know what the services are. I'm on the phone with clients, and sometimes I ask, these are clients who have applied for IHSS and maybe have been denied. And I say to them, well, what services did you ask for? What do you need? And there's silence on the other end. Well, that just tells me that they really don't know the program, and you really need to know the program, because I'll tell you something. Social workers are not going to spend the amount of time they really need to spend with you when they're assessing your needs. They just don't have the time. They have a lot of cases to go through. And if you've ever had an assessment, they come in, they may ask you, well, what's new? Has anything changed? And then make you sign a bunch of paperwork. But you may have a lot to say, and they may not have a lot of time to hear you. So when you're doing your self-assessment, as we will teach you in this third part of the series, you're going to want to, have a document that shows the social worker exactly the services you want and why, etc. But you have to know what the services are. So we have domestic services. And there's a whole list of domestic services, you know, cleaning the kitchen counters, the floors, vacuuming, etc. And the MPP on domestic services, the regulations talk about that. And as we go through some of the tools, you'll see the definitions for all these services. Then there's a category called related services, and it includes meal prep, meal cleanup, laundry, shopping for food, or shopping for other things or errands. Then we have a whole category of what are called personal care services. And you see that it includes a lot: feeding, bed baths, dressing, menstrual care, transferring, you know, moving in and out of bed or on and off seats, bathing, grooming, oral hygiene, repositioning and rubbing skin, care with prosthetic devices, and help setting up medications. You know, setting it so that the person can take the medication. Maybe if you have to assist the person in actually taking the medication, that may be a paramedical service. Accompaniment to appointments, and we're going to talk more about that. There are certain special circumstances where the program may give you some time for cleaning, heavy cleaning, or cleaning your yard. This is especially true when, you know, you're not going to get someone to do heavy cleaning every 2 weeks or every month. This is in special circumstances where, for example, I'm renting and my landlord comes into the house to do the annual inspection. They're allowed to do that with 24-hour notice. And it's a mess and it's dirty. And he says to me, you know, you better clean this up, otherwise I may give you notice, right? So I may call the social worker and say, hey, you know, I need someone to help. Maybe my provider can be given some extra hours because I've been told that if I don't clean this up, I'm out of here. So those circumstances, protective supervision, we're going to talk about. There's also a category of service called teaching and demonstration. There are certain services, like I'm trying to remember, meal prep and other services where the program will pay the provider some extra time to teach you how to do the service. The goal of this is so that you can do it and you don't need the IHSS service anymore. And I can tell you, and I'm sure Mary can agree, I've never seen anyone get teaching and demonstration. So it's one of those that you'll
That's correct, Maria.
never see it. And then paramedical services, we're going to talk about paramedical services also in detail. I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to stop right now for questions. I'll do that in a little while. But I want just to go to understanding how hours are calculated. And the first thing I want to review is the fact that there are 4 programs under IHSS. So you have to think of IHSS as this umbrella. And under these umbrella, there is the Personal Care Services Program, the IHSS Plus Program, the Residual Program, and the Community First Choice Option Program. When you get your notice of action awarding you hours, it'll say you've been placed on the Personal Care Services Program or the IHSS Plus Option Program, and you're going to get these hours and these services. And I can tell you that the majority of people don't even pay attention to that. And for the most part, it may not matter that you don't pay attention to that, but it does matter under certain circumstances what program they put you under. And we're going to visit that in a moment. But first, I want to give you a definition of these different programs. So if you're on the CSP program, you're not a parent provider of a minor child, and you're not a spouse provider of your spouse. Okay. If you're a parent provider of your minor child or a spouse provider of your other spouse, you might be placed on the IPO program. Another reason you might be placed in the IPO program is you're receiving advance pay. There are 2 ways that providers get paid. One way is that they submit timesheets and down the line they get paid. The other way, and it's for people who are considered severely impaired under the IHSS program, and there's a definition for that I will review in a moment. If you're considered severely impaired, what happens is that the program let's say I'm receiving IHSS. So the program, and I'm considered severely impaired. The program will send me the money. And at the end of the month and middle of the month, I'll make out the check to the provider. Why? Because I'm severely impaired. It's critical that I receive the care that I need every day. And it'd be terrible for the provider to leave me because the provider's not getting paid in a reasonable time. So that's advance pay. Or if you're receiving a meal allowance, you can opt for a meal allowance in lieu of meal preparation, and I think what other category. And the state will give you a little bit of money so that you can go buy meals. And that's the restaurant meal allowance. So if you're getting any of these, if you fall under any of these three categories, you're going to be you might be placed in the IPO program. The residual program is the only IHSS program where the federal government is not chipping in. The residual program is paid for by the state of California, not the federal government. And this is for people whose immigration status does not allow them to get the IHSS where the federal government is helping to pay. And by the way, you need to have Medi-Cal in order to apply for IHSS. If you don't have Medi-Cal, you cannot apply for IHSS. So, and so this is people, for example, who become lawful permanent residents. And the first 5 years of being a lawful permanent resident, you cannot apply for SSI. You cannot apply for any Medi-Cal program where the federal government is participating. And California has Medi-Cal programs where the federal government is not participating. So for people who are in that status, or maybe persons residing under color of law, and there's a long list of different immigration statuses that make you a person residing under color of law. And then the Community First Option program is for people who, if they were not living at home, they would meet the criteria for entering a nursing facility at their different levels of care. And, there are a lot of people on this program, children and adults. So why does it matter? It matters under this circumstance. And let me tell you what severely impaired means. So, and it's all in this information. You're going to get it. You don't have to worry about, writing it down as I'm talking about it, because what I'm telling you is in our training material that you're going to get. So someone's considered severely impaired in the program if they're receiving at least 20 hours a week in the following categories, any combination thereof: meal prep, meal cleanup, any of the personal care services, and paramedical services. So if you look at your notice of action and those and hours in those categories add up to 20 or more a week, then you're considered severely impaired. Another thing, for the protective supervision service, you can only get one of 2 hours. If you're not severely impaired, you can get 195. And if you're severely impaired, you can get 283. So if I'm placed in the PCSP program and I'm not severely impaired and I need, for example, protective supervision, the program will give me 195 in protective supervision. And let's say I need another 50 hours in personal care, paramedical, any of the related services. So the program will give me 195 plus the 50 hours. I can only get a max of 283, right? And it's the same for the CFCO program. It works the same way, but it's very different for the 2 other programs, the IPO program and the residual program. If you're non-severely impaired, you can only get up to 195 hours of IHSS a month, period, end of story. So in the case where I need protective supervision, I'm non-severely impaired, they would give me the 195 protective supervision, but I would not get those extra 50 hours a month. So when you're looking at your notice and you notice that they put you on the IPO program, you might want to appeal, or you might want to talk to the social worker, but because perhaps they should have put you on the CFCO program. And this last column has information on each program. All county information notice, all county letters talk about each program. So if you want to know more about each program, you could Google this and you'll find it. You could contact us. You could go to the California Department of Social Services website and look at, there's a section called letters, and that's where you're going to find this information. So that's one thing to look out for, because, you know, if you're on the CFCO program and you're non-severely impaired, you could get up to 283. But if they put you on the IPO program and you're non-severely impaired, you could only get 195. The residual program is a little bit more difficult to get out of because it's based on your immigration status. So in this case, I tell people, look at the categories that would make you severely impaired and see if you can't increase the hours in those categories, right? That would be the thing to do. I'm going to stop right now to see if there are any questions about what I've said so far. I have a lot to say, so I want to focus the questions on what I've said so far.
Please feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat. I don't see any questions related to what you've covered, Maria.
Okay, thanks. Here's information on what's severely impaired and non-severely impaired, so you'll have that information. I want to talk about something else that will also affect your hours, and it's called proration. And only these services can be prorated: domestic, heavy cleaning, and related services. Those are the only services that can be prorated in the program. What does it mean? Let's say that I am living with someone else and my provider cooks my meals, and the person I'm living with shares in those meals. Well, the program says, wait a minute, you know, that person who's sharing in the meals, you know, made by the provider is not in the IHSS program. So Maria, you know, your total need for preparing meals is 10 hours, but because that other person shares in your meals and that person's not in the IHSS program, we're going to prorate your time. So rather than giving me 10 hours a week in meal prep, they'll divide that by the number of people who are sharing my meals, which is my roommate. And so rather than giving me 10 hours a week, they're going to give me 5 hours a week, because that service is prorated. So anytime anyone in the household shares in whatever in domestic, heavy cleaning, or related services, that service will be prorated by the number of people who are sharing in that service. Right? Makes sense that they would do that. So that's one concept. The other concept I want to talk about are alternative resources. So if you're receiving IHSS-like services through other programs, such as adult daycare, school, day program, the IHSS program is going to deduct time for that, because what they do is let's say that I go to a day program, adult day program, where they prepare my meals and they help feed me. And so IHSS has given me time for that. So IHSS social worker will determine my total need and then deduct time for the time that I'm getting that service at the day program, right? So that is going to reduce the amount of the time I'm going to get for that service, because I'm getting part of my need met through another program. Same with school. If you have a child who is receiving IHSS and receives bowel and bladder and feeding, for example, and they're doing that at school for him, well, they're going to deduct time for in the areas of bowel and bladder and feeding, because your son is getting that need met in part through the school. If your child is on summer vacation. And they've been taking out, the IHSS program has been taking out hours for alternative resources. You need to talk to the social worker about giving you that time back. Excuse me, while your child is not in school. It's really important. And they may say, oh, we don't do that. And I say, yes, they can, and they have to. The law says that the only time they can take time out as an alternative resource is if the person is accessing that program. So when your child is in school, excuse me, yes, they can take out the time, but when the child is not in school, they have to give you that time back. And if they say, no, we're not, you can take them to hearing. You're going to win for sure. So this document gives you that information. Before I continue to review a sample notice of action, any questions about what I've said?
I see no hands raised and no questions in the chat.
By the way, we're not taping the questions and answer session, so don't be shy, about asking your question if you think we're taping it. We're not. When I stop for question and answer, we stop the recording. So none of this will be presented to anyone, right? Just so that you know.
There is a hand up if we can pause the recording. Evangeline.
Yes.
One second, Evangeline.
Yes, 1 second. I'm waiting for Fatima to stop the recording.
Your hours will now be 100 hours a month, and it's a decrease of 50 hours. So I was getting 150 hours before, and now it's only going to be 100. Well, I'm not happy with that. And then I read the back of the notice of action, and it says that if I want to appeal this notice of action, and I want nothing to change until there's a hearing decision, I have to appeal before the effective date of the notice. This is the effective date of the notice as of June 1st, the effective date of when the change is going to happen. So I would have to call state fair hearings and appeal before June 1st and ask for aid paid pending. So if I do that, come June 1st, my services will not change until there's a hearing decision or I come to some agreement with the county between the time I appeal and I go to hearing. So that's really important. Otherwise, you have 90 days from the date of the notice to appeal an IHSS decision. But if you want aid paid pending, if you don't want anything to change, you need to appeal before this effective date on the notice. First column will be the services. Note that domestic services are on a monthly basis. The rest of the services are given on a weekly basis in this notice. So the second column is the total number of hours the social worker feels you need for the service. So let's say for meal prep, in my example, it was 10 hours a week. So the social worker would put 10 hours here. But remember, the person I live with shares in all my meals. So here, the social worker is going to prorate. It's going to divide my 10 hours by 2 people, me and my roommate. And so here, the social worker will put 5 hours, right? This is what's left after proration. 5 hours is what's going to be prorated. And so the next column is the difference between the 10 minus the 5 is 5 hours, amount of service you need. That's the 5 hours, right? Because it's been prorated. And you notice that all of the rest of the services are grayed out in the proration column. So they can only prorate domestic and related services. So from the amount of service I need, 5 hours, the next column is the alternative resources column. So if I go to a day program and they help prepare my meals, well, the social worker is going to take time out for that. And so the result of that is the now column, the little column in the last column, was what I was is the amount I was getting before in my prior notice of action. And the last little column will tell me if it's an increase or decrease in the hours. If the current now is more than I was getting before or less than I was getting before. And so you add up all the weekly hours, you multiply that by 4.33 weeks in a month, you get a subtotal. Then you add the domestic hours because domestic is monthly. And then you add anything else like the special limited time limited services and for the total. So that's how the IHSS notice of action reads. That's how it works. Any questions about this?
Maria, there is a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I'll
Okay.
go ahead and wait until they pause.
Go ahead.
The question is, if you lose the appeal, will they retroactively deduct hours?
So I've been doing this for over 20 years. They're not precluded from doing that, but I've never seen them go after people. So I can't guarantee that they won't, but I haven't seen it happen. I don't know, Mary, if you've ever seen it happen.
I have not, Maria.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. And then we have a hand raised from Artemis.
Hi. So if they're in school, and then summertime comes, you would ask for the increase in hours. Which parts would that affect? And then would they automatically know when school starts? And
No, absolutely not. They will not know. You have to tell them. You have to communicate with the social worker about the changes. So you would look at the column. First, you have to look at the column that says services you refused or get from others. This is the alternative resources column. You'll have to look at the notice to see if they've taken any time out, right? And if they've taken any time out, it's probably because they have information that your son is getting the same kind of service through the school. So then what you would do is when you know what his spring break is going to be or his summer break is going to be, you should be communicating with the social worker way in advance and saying, look, during this period of time, my son is not getting his alternative resource hours because he's at home. And so therefore I want those hours back, right? So they should issue a new notice of action effective the day your son stops going to school, giving him that time back. But you really have to be looking at this column first to decide whether you would be doing that or not. Now, if at any time your son needs more hours, you could always, at any time you can call the social worker and says, hey, my son needs to be reassessed because he needs more hours in this category, that category, whatever. You don't have to wait until the year evaluation to ask for time, to ask for more services.
is it true that you can only do that once every 3 months?
No. I'm going to look at the first tool that a social worker will use. It's called the functional index ranking tool. So once the social worker is ready to assess your case and decide what services to give you and how much time, they're going to look at this functional index ranking chart. And they're going to assign a rank to each service that you've requested. A rank 1 means you're independent. You don't need IHSS. Rank 2, you can do the service, but you need some kind of prompting, encouragement, verbal assistance. Rank 3, you need some human assistance. Rank 4, you need substantial human assistance to do the task. Rank 5, you cannot do the task and you need total human assistance. And rank 6 is for paramedical. So let's say in my example, I tell the social worker that I cannot prepare my meals because of my physical limitations, and I explain in detail what they are and why I can't do it. I expect that the social worker is going to give me a rank of 5, but I won't know that when I get my notice of action. I I can always call the social worker and ask, well, what ranking did you give me? Or if I appeal, I have access to my record at IHSS and I can look at the record, and the assessment that the social worker did will have the ranking that the social worker gave to every service. So these are the rankings, and the rankings are applied to children and to adults. Now, I want to talk about this chart, the functional index ranking for children chart. And we'll also bring up the Vineland scale, Vineland maturity scale, and the developmental guide, because we use this when we're preparing for our assessments or our hearings. And I'll show you how we do that. Oopsie daisy. Uh-oh. I think this is where it ends for me. Hold on. Let's see. Just want to see, this is what happens. I lose the, so Lonnie, do you have it ready to go? I'm going to stop sharing so Lonnie can share. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So this is the functional index ranking. Can you scroll it just to make it a little big? Yeah. Is it possible for you to make the screen bigger so everyone? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So the functional index, this is, so when people ask me, I have a child with this disability and this is what he needs services, this is what he can't do, can he get services? I always say to people, and these are for people, for kids under the age of 18, I say you need to start with this chart and figure it out. Because this is the chart that the social workers will use. These are the functional index rankings, you know, from 1 to 6, so we know what they are. And this is what they use. So the first column is age, from 0 to 17. Housework, these are domestic services. You see that there are 1s all along, all down the column. A 1 in the ranking system means you're independent, you're not going to get any services. But when we're talking about kids, they're not necessarily independent, they're just not going to get the service. And if you look at the note 2, it says minors who have a functional index ranking of 1 in housework will not get any service regardless of any extraordinary need they may have. And these are for where the minor is getting services from a parent provider. Now, but the first note says all minors should be assessed a functional index ranking of 1. So we have a lot of 1s here. Unless there's an extraordinary need that's documented. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that except for domestic services, if you see a 1 for your child's age and service that you're asking for, you have to think about what the extraordinary need is for the service, and the program will give it to you. Sometimes social workers, let's say we're talking about a kid who's 12 years old and we're asking for laundry. Right off the bat, I'll tell you, most social workers will say, well, to the parent, well, we can't give you time for that. It's your responsibility as a parent. What they're really saying is, I know the functional index ranking chart for minors, and a 12-year-old for laundry gets a 1, meaning we're not going to give it to them, right? What you need to say is, I know you're referring to the functional index ranking chart for a child. And I also know that if my child has an extraordinary need, he can get that time. And let me give you an example of an extraordinary need. So we represented a child who lives with his father, and father goes to the laundromat 1 time a week to do his clothes and his child's clothes. And the way that the program looks at a child is they will always compare a child of your child's age with a disability to a child of the same age without a disability, and ask, can a child without a disability do the task that the parent with the child with a disability is asking for, right? So, so in this case, it's that one time that the father goes to the laundromat to wash his clothes and his son's clothes, you would do for a typical child, right? At least once. That is a normal thing. That is not an extraordinary need. It's something that you would do for any typical child. Where does it become extraordinary in this case of a 12-year-old? Well, he uses diapers. He has a lot of accidents. So he soils his clothes, he soils his sheets often. He likes to put his hand in his diaper, take out feces, smear it on him everywhere. So father also testified at the hearing that he goes an additional 2 times a week to the laundromat just to wash his son's clothes because of what's happening. Because of the son's disability, he uses diapers, he's soiling his clothes, he's smearing feces. That was the extraordinary need, right? It's above and beyond what you would do for a typical child because of this child's disability. And the judge agreed that those 2 extra times that the father had to go to the laundromat were extraordinary need times and gave the child time for laundry. So if you see a 1, it doesn't mean you're not going to get it. You have to figure out what the extraordinary need is of your child in order to ask for it. And if a social worker says to you, oh no, that's your obligation, you need to remind them that you understand they're looking at the functional index ranking, that you understand that for a 12-year-old, the ranking would normally be 1, but to remind them that your son can get time if you have, because he has these extraordinary needs, and you have to explain in detail what those extraordinary needs are. Don't expect the social worker to ask you, what are your extraordinary needs? What are your child's extraordinary needs? I would be shocked if a social worker did that. I mean, that's what they should be doing, but that they do it is another story. For the most part, there may be a social worker out there that does it, but that's not, in the 20 years I've been doing this, I've not heard of that happening. Usually parents are told it's your responsibility as a parent to take care of your child, period, end of story. I'm going to stop right now because it's really important for you to understand this chart and to know that if you have a child and you're looking to the IHSS program for services, this is where you start with this chart to figure out what services your child might be able to get, what ranking you would give your child, and go from there. This is a good time to probably go to the 2 documents, either one, the Vineland and the Developmental Chart. So the next couple of documents, we've given you the links to these documents, and we use them in conjunction with the functional index ranking for kids. This adapted Vineland social maturity scale was prepared by, the IHSS, the county, CDSS, in conjunction with some other entity there. And as you see, it informs us at what age a typical child does the service, right? So for example, in the area of preparing meals, it says that a typical child at 5 years old can use a knife for spreading, at 6 years old can use a table knife for cutting, at 8 years old can wash dishes and cleans up, and at 17 is able to cook simple meals. So this is something that the social worker can use to figure out, well, because when they're comparing a typical child of the same age as your child with a disability, what is it that a typical child can do that your child still can't do at that age? And that's when you're able to get services, right? Possibly get services. So this is something that we use when we're preparing our assessment. We want to instruct the judge or the social worker, because you can give this assessment to the social worker, that a typical child, like my 12-year-old, the typical child can cut his food at age 6, and this child is 12 and he can't use a knife or a fork. He can't do any of that. So we use this. And then the other thing that we also refer to is called it's a developmental chart. Same concept. The developmental chart it's a guide. It shows you at what age a typical child will do something. So for example, if you're looking at an infancy under gross motor, a typical child can stand alone by 10 to 12 months, walk unassisted by 15 months, and run by 18 months. If your child is not doing that around these periods, then it's possible that there may be a developmental delay. So we use these two things to inform the social worker, inform the judge if you have to go to hearing, what a typical child can do versus your child of the same age can't do. So really important. And we're going to give you I think the training material has the links to these things so that you can use them, look them up and use them. So now we're going to go to the presentation again. Thank you, Lonnie. It will just be a moment. So that's the functional index ranking. We use those two other documents in conjunction with that. So this next tool helps the social worker come up with what functional index ranking should I give this person, right? So the social worker has the functional index ranking, but this document helps that social worker get to that answer. What ranking should I give this person? Now, in our training material, we only provided a sample of this document. The whole document, because it's very big, is in that all county information notice, in that link in the beginning of the training that I showed you. So all of it is there. This is just an example so that you know what it looks like. So, it gives general information to the social worker about, questions they may be asking, observations. The next section is observations, what the social worker should be doing when they're doing the assessment, what should they be observing? Because their observations, they're going to note their observations in the assessment that they do. So for example, can you just scroll down so we can see the whole of observation? So for example, if your child is present during an assessment and you say to the social worker, well, my child needs help with ambulation. He can't get in and out of the chair without assistance. Or he needs assistance moving from here to there. And the social worker observes your child running all over the place without any assistance and getting up from chairs. And, first of all, she's not going to believe you. And secondly, she's probably going to write that observation down in the notes. And those are observations that, if she goes to a hearing, and you're arguing that your son should get ambulation hour, she's going to say, I observed this when I was at the assessment, and it'll be in her notes. So just be mindful that the social workers are there to observe everything that goes on. A good piece of advice that we got at one of the trainings, Mary, you might remember, is sometimes when the social worker comes out to the home and you've got a child, you want to keep the child kind of quiet. You give them the iPad. You want to be nice and still so that you can get through the assessment. We say, just let the child be the way the child is. And so, so that the social worker can observe the child as he or she really is, right? Because the social worker may say, oh, I observed the child for the hour and a half I was there, and you're asking for protective supervision, for example, and he was just fine. He sat and he didn't do anything. I didn't observe him, doing anything that would cause him injury. So really important just to let the child be as he or she normally is in the home during an assessment. It may, the child's behavior or what the child is doing may interrupt the assessment, but it's natural. You want the social worker to observe the child in the correct environment, right? the way it really is at home.
Maria, can you also talk a little bit about the importance of, for example, when they ask the child questions and how important that is because they determine that the child is self-directing?
So thanks, Mary. You're referring to when you're asking for protective
Yes.
supervision, and they start asking, the social worker may ask the questions of the child, like, what's your name? And the child gives them the name. What would you do in an emergency? Call 911. And let's say that the child answers the questions appropriately. Well, we've seen time and time again, the social worker denying protective supervision because they say, oh, the child understands the questions and knows what to do. The child is self-directing. The child understands danger, right? Understands what they're supposed to do. Well, I had a mom who was in that situation, and she actually worked with the doctor to write a letter explaining that the child is taught what to say, but the child really doesn't. The child knows that, in an emergency you call 911, but the child could not carry through with that. The child would not know what to do, right? So it's really important, if the county's saying, in the case of protective supervision, if the county's saying the child is self-directing, the child understands danger, understands, that if he does something, he's going to get injured, right? But that's the wrong way to approach it, because children are taught to say things, but that doesn't mean that they're going to carry out or they really understand the concept. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Maria.
So I want to go back to the chart because I just want to show you that for every service, not the chart, I'm sorry. Let's go down the document to the first category of services, which is domestic services. They talk about the ranking, variable functioning, if the functioning varies throughout the month, the rank should reflect the level of functioning that occurs the majority of time in a given week or month, right? Because sometimes your ability to do things, to function varies from day to day. I may wake up and not be able to do anything, whereas the next day I may wake up and be able to do a few things. So this is what variable functioning means. And then we scroll down. So domestic services. So here is where the definition of domestic services is. So this document will have all of the definitions for all of the services. This is directly from the regulations, by the way, and gives the social worker observations, like, things to look for, questions to ask. Now, these are not all the observations that the social worker should be doing or all the questions that the social worker should be asking, just examples of those kinds of things. And so let's say that the social worker is trying to figure out domestic services. What kind of ranking would I give to? So for example, cleaning kitchen counters, right? Because you have to rank each task, because each task I may rank differently in cleaning kitchen counters versus cleaning floors. I may not be able to clean floors, but I may be able to, with some assistance, with a little bit of help, clean the kitchen counters. So the social worker looks at the ranking, and under independent, it says person's able to perform all the chores without risk to health or safety, is able to, even though the person may do a few things every day, so long as she doesn't exert herself. So it's possible the social worker would say, well, this person can do it. Yeah, it might take this person a little longer to do the task, but they can do it. And it instructs the social worker on what type of, how you would document the file, right? So maybe it would say, although the recipient moves slowly, he's able to complete his own domestic chores without assistance from any other person. And so, Lonnie, if you scroll down this document, you can see other categories of services, and it gives the social worker examples of rankings and how you would document that in the file. So preparing meals, for example, here are the definitions, observations, and the kinds of things to look for and how you would rank. So this document is really for ranking, right? It helps the social worker come up with a rank and instructs the social worker on how to document the file. So we're going to go ahead and, so now let's say that the social worker has now assigned a functional index ranking to the services. The next thing the social worker is going to do is look at the hourly task guidelines. And that's the next thing. So we're going to scroll down. So these are the hourly task guidelines, and you'll note that the first column, we've got services, and then there are rankings, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with different colors for each ranking. And these are guidelines. And I think the most important thing that you should know is that they're just guidelines. They're not the law. And if there's an exception to the guidelines, you could get more time, or you might get less time than the guideline says, because you don't need that much time in that service. So for example, let's talk about meal prep. Let's say that I said to the social worker, I need 10 hours of meal prep. And I explain in detail why. I eat a lot. It takes time to cook my food. It has to be pureed, etc. Right? It's possible that the social worker, and I would think that, and I need total assistance. So let's say that the social worker ranks me a 5 and then says to me, or issues a notice of action saying that in the area of meal prep, I'm going to get 7 hours. And I say, wait a minute, but I asked for 10 and I gave good explanation as to why I needed the 10 hours. I call the social worker and I say, but I asked for 10, why didn't you give me the 10 hours? The social worker is most likely going to say to me, it's the most I can give you, Maria. I can't give you any more. And I say to her, I say, look, I know you're referring to the hourly task guidelines, and they're only guidelines. And as you know, if there is an exception to the guideline, I can get those 10 hours. And I talk to you about my meal prep time and why I need this much time. And I believe I'm entitled to that time. And the social worker could say, well, let me look at this again, or could say, look, if you're not happy with your notice of action, you can appeal. And that's the end of that story. But, you know, it's important to know that you can ask for more time than what the hourly task guideline says, but you have to talk to the social worker about the time that you need and why you need more time, right? Than what the hourly task guideline says for the ranking. And so the rankings are in low, mid, and high. So this is the way that the hourly task guideline works. Now, there is also a document that helps the social workers come up with exceptions to more time in the guidelines or to less time than what the guideline gives. So it's possible that someone could get, if they're a rank 5, they could get less than 7 hours a week, depending on the circumstance. So that document is the next document we're going to look at. And this is also in the All County Information Notice. It's all there. This is the hourly task guideline quick reference tool that the social workers could use. And so this hourly, and this is just a little snapshot of some of them because it's a very big document, and you know, I just want to show you what it looks like. So if we scroll down, so how it starts is that every service is defined, and we've seen that in that other document. But the thing about this one is it tells you the regulation where you could find this information. So this is all that's involved in domestic and related services: sweeping, vacuuming, washing and waxing floors, etc. And then exceptions, right? Exceptions that might give you more time than the guideline, or that might make it less time than the less time in the guideline. So factors to consider, you know, does the person have a separate bedroom and bathroom? Are there any rooms not being used by the recipient? Does the person have a physical, really, and or mental limitation that contributes to needing more assistance? So exceptions to the guideline could include if the person has incontinence, frequent changes of bed linen may be necessary. If the person doesn't have protective pads. In the case I had with the child that was 12 years old, the dad had protective pads, but it didn't really matter. Child still soiled because he moves around in the bed and the pads move around, and it just wasn't working. Extra changing of sheets should be assessed as domestic services, but washing them should be assessed as laundry. And then it gives examples of low. So if the house is very small, it may be that you're going to get less time than what the guideline says, you know, for domestic. If you're, you know, or you could get more. If an exception for high is the person has severe asthma and there's more dusting and vacuuming that's necessary, or due to incontinence, you have extra sheets that need to be changed, not laundered, but changed, right? Because it's different when you take the service of taking the sheets off the bed is different than laundry. These are just examples. So there could be other things that will make an exception for more time than the guidelines or less time than the guidelines. And it says here, total time per month of domestic services is 6 unless adjustments apply. What they're talking about are exceptions, right? So long time ago, I think you might have heard this before, I don't know. I use it because it brings home the point. I asked for more time for a client for domestic services. The social worker kept saying, the maximum we can give you is 6 hours a month. I said, no, I can get more. Anyway, long story short, went to hearing, presented testimony and evidence that my client needed more hours, more than 6 hours of domestic services, and the judge gave him more than 30 hours of domestic services a month. So, you know, I hope that brings the point to you that these are just guidelines, and you need to start thinking about what the exceptions are to the guidelines so that you could get that time. And as we scroll down, we have, for example, meal prep. We have the definition of meal prep, factors that will maybe make you have, maybe you'll get less than what the low end of the range is, of the ranking. If all I eat for breakfast is toast and coffee, and let's say for lunch I have a soup, because it's really hard for me to swallow, and some liquid, and then I reheat the soup for dinner, how much? It's not a lot of time for meal prep every day. And it's possible that when I add up my time on a weekly basis, it may be less than 7 hours. So it's possible to get less than the low rank or high. Maybe I'll get more time because my food needs to be pureed, or it needs to be cut up into bite-sized pieces, or I have to eat more, right? Whatever it is, these are examples. So this document, I want to just let you know, is to help the social worker figure out what, in the guideline, is there an exception to less? Is there an exception to more than what the guideline says? And the rest of it is just examples. You know, the document is a long document because it has every service, right? Laundry. And are we at the end of the presentation there? I think we are.
Yes.
Okay. So, so in any event, that's, in a nutshell, an overview of what happens, when the social worker is ready to decide what services you should be getting and how much time and the tools that they are using. And I think another point I want to make is you need to be proactive. You need to be prepared when that assessment happens or your reassessment, so that you can hand a document to the social worker with the services. And you'll see when we do the third part of this training, what this assessment looks like. You need to be prepared. And by doing this assessment, you're like so prepared for hearing, because I also know that a lot of people don't appeal because they're afraid. They don't know. They don't know what to do after you file for a hearing. Procedurally, what do you do? And then how do you prepare for a hearing? Goodness, that's really scary. And the thought of going to a hearing and being in front of the judge, and that the fourth part of this IHSS training will focus on preparing for a hearing and what that means. So I hope this has been helpful to you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
If there are any questions,